For those of you who are within the district or outside, I'm Michelle Armstrong, the school community liaison. Had a role in bringing this amazing man back into our district. Michael Nerney was here with us several years ago and did a presentation on adolescent brain and high-risk behavior, which left us all kind of wanting more. So we're fortunate enough to have him back today doing a session on current trends in adolescent substance abuse, and then an afternoon session on teenage brain stress and learning, and then this evening he'll be with us for a parent event. So I want you all to please welcome Michael Nerney. He is an expert in the field of brain research and adolescence, and I'm just hoping someday somebody says the word expert with my name around anything. I really don't care what it is, but please welcome Michael Nerney.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I actually do I have a wonderful opportunity to go visit all these research centers at Cornell and McLean Hospital, a Harvard affiliate, and look at what is going on in terms of having new imaging systems look into kids' brains in real time. So there'll be just a few of those up here today, but we're going to talk about how some of the new images, like this one up on the top right here, that's diffusion spectrum imaging. And right now, you can use this, and of course each one of these devices costs $8 million, but you can put a 16-year-old boy up on this device, and what looks like all those colored threads, each one represents about 12 to 18,000 neural pathways, and you can watch in real time as events happen in this brain. And the imaging is so spectacular, and I'm just impressed with it, I guess in two directions. One is that these are fascinating images. I guess the other direction that impresses me is that there is activity in a 16-year-old male brain, and we can actually describe that for you and show it to you day or night. So some of the new research is about nighttime in the teenage brain, which turns out to be an entirely different landscape than nighttime in any other age brain. So part of this current trends deal that we're going to talk about is not just, why are drugs, what new drugs are out there, but why are they attractive, particularly to this age group? And so there'll be a number of things that I hope help make sense out of it based on the brain research. But one of the things about the brain that we're finding out between 11 and 24 years of age is that this is a powerful time of emotional intensity. So what happens? You get pituitary growth hormones show up, you get testosterone family for males and the estrogen families for females, and it turns out not only are they powerful in impacting physical growth and secondary sex characteristics, sexual maturation, for example, but those hormones both impact on a little place down low in this brain, in the emotional part of the brain called the amygdala. So the amygdala is a little center in the brain. It is the home of emotional generation. And for about 12 years, those hormones influence that part of the brain to become larger and more active. It's what every home needs. A 13-year-old whose emotional generating system of the brain is larger and more active than anyone else's in the household. And so when I'm with parents and they're like, maybe you could explain to me why my 15-year-old daughter has chosen to be a drama queen, I can pretty much tell them that that's not a choice that any kid makes. That's a brain change in the developmental phase that means for them, by and large, that every emotion in that brain is felt or experienced with 2 to 4 times the intensity that our emotions are felt or experienced. So when we talk about some of the drugs today, like the opioids, when we talk about pills on the street, not OxyContin anymore, we're not seeing much of that because the federal government forced the manufacturer, Purdue Pharma, to change the formulation of OxyContin. OxyContin used to be readily and easily crushable, so you could crush those pills up. So you get an extended release pill that's going to last 12 hours. The instant you crush it, you destroy the binding capacity for the extended releaser. So when you snort that pill, you get 12 hours at once. If you crush that pill up, you can snort it. Or you can dissolve it and inject it. Well, the federal government, because there was so many OxyContin overdoses, so many fatalities, and so much addiction to it, forced them into changing the formulation so you can't crush OxyContin anymore. It smushes when you try to crush it, which is wonderful. except there are 110 other synthetic opioids out there. And so now you'll hear words like Roxy, from the kids. That's Roxanol. I'll show you a picture of that coming up. Or Opies, that's Opana. So you'll see the shift. And one reason that kids like the opioids is that it's so powerful in terms of relieving emotional distress. So when we talk about kids and drugs, a driving force for them is also medication for their feelings, and that is because their feelings are legitimately 2 to 4 times more powerful than ours are. And often, in terms of their, in terms of their parents' view or other adults' view, it's hard for us to remember what it was like to be in that brain, however many years ago. So often kids say that when they talk to adults about their emotions, the adults either inadvertently deny that they're true. So when a kid comes to you and says, I hate my math teacher, we say, oh, no, you don't, Well, according to the research, yeah, they do. And they can hate that math teacher with 2 to 4 times the intensity that we could hate anyone else. And so kids say, I say my emotional truth, somebody says, no, you don't. Or I say my emotional truth and someone says, either some old cliche, like, well, I don't know. When I was growing up in a household, my mom and dad had 8 kids. My mom had 7 boys in a row. I know, and when we visited her in the institution, she offered to respond to us. She's 92, and she's great. But she had a ton of stuff to do. So my dad would get some of the jobs, like helping us with our emotional difficulties. So when the first girlfriend I had, who decided I was good boyfriend material when we were both in the 9th grade, got me to date her, which I willingly did for like 2 weeks, and then found out I was not really good boyfriend material, so she dropped me. But I was like heartbroken because my status had gone up, and I was like pretty cool because I was going out with Charlene Morris. And so after she ditched me, I wouldn't come down for dinner one Friday night, and I was a pretty good eater. So my mom's sending my dad up, and he's like, he doesn't get it. It's not because he's a bad dad. He doesn't remember. So he's saying things like, there are other fish in the sea. And I'm like, yeah, Dad, see, I want to go with fish. I want to go with Charlie Morris. And then he waits 5 minutes and says, another bus comes along every 20 minutes. Hey, is it a bus to the fish market? I'll take it, And I don't want to come downstairs, and I'm not hungry, and I want to wallow in my misery and listen to sad Roy Orbison songs over and over, because only the lonely know the way I feel tonight. And so when adults say your emotions don't count, it is not helpful. Or worse, when parents say, do you think you have pain now? No. Wait until you're upside down on your mortgage, or underwater on your car payment, or have a kid who has, needs better braces. Thanks for that encouragement. If you think your life is bad now, just wait. It gets so much worse for you. So for kids, powerful emotions often are accompanied by, denial or basically diminishment of their emotional realities, but drugs never do that. They always suppress whatever negative emotion you're dealing with. That's why people choose them out. So it's a real powerful issue. And the other brand new research out of the University of Pittsburgh shows us something every parent has known, and many have experienced, and that is at about 13 years of age, a set of new sites flood this developing brain. Those new sites appear primarily, down low, over towards the back, in a little place called the nucleus accumbens, and it turns out that place, the NA, the nucleus accumbens, is critically involved in all the reward pathways inside the human brain. So isn't it interesting that these new sites are going to appear, and the parts that make your brain feel emotional reward, and it turns out we can link those sites directly to risk-taking activity. So for 13-year-olds, who we often talk exactly, it turns out, the wrong way about risk. This is the scariest thing you could do. This is the worst drug ever. If you ever did this, these terrible things could happen. In some ways, that kind of talk in fact, generates higher emotional value in the undertaking of that risk. So risk assessment for these young brains does not process and manage and come out in terms of the consequences the way your brains and mine do. And anybody who can remember, Judge and I were just talking earlier about, because I was here, I've been here before, but I was also up in the Cleveland area, and a judge up there, or a prosecutor up there, and I'm not going to remember all the details, whose brain hadn't changed yet in terms of assessing risk, took me to Cedar Point. You know, but my brain had already changed, and so I was frightened for the entire evening. But if anybody here can remember how much you loved scary rides when you were younger, and now you look at them and you would like to see the certificate for the steel inspection on that, or like once I went to, part of my research, I worked for a place called Narcotic and Drug Research. We used to research the small town carnivals when they were setting them up, and identify the number of workers who were stoned at the time they were setting up the Ferris wheel. See, once you do that research, you don't ever go on a ride again, you know, without a lot more certification. This is a brain that loves that kind of excitement and doesn't see things as the bad things that could happen, but what emotional reward, and because it's often in the accompaniment of peers, what status change will happen if I take this risk. So I'm out of school millions of, late years ago, it seems like, when I worked at the state of New York in prevention education and training. And I'm out of school where, in fact, 34 kids have been analyzed and evaluated and 17 sent to the local hospital because they're middle school students. And one of the kids had gone with his mom on, so remember like Take Your Kid to Work Day? So she took her kid to work. He was a middle school student, an 8th grade boy. And she was a nurse, and while he was there, he stole several bottles of Coumadin, a blood thinner, from the supply. It's not locked up, it's not an opioid, so it's not much security. And then he sold them at his middle school the next Monday for $1 a piece, telling the kids they were energy pills. And a bunch of them, 34 kids, bought the pills. And some of them bought multiple pills. So one young boy, a 7th grader who had bought 4 pills and consumed them, was in a gym class in middle school. And you know how middle school gym is, like you guys, some of you know this, like they have these games, like, I don't know, like Red Rover, let's dislocate your shoulder, those kind, So one of this, I guess this was dodgeball. It's like, who can suffer a minor concussion today? So they're playing dodgeball, one kid gets hit, this kid gets hit right in the side of the face, and starts bleeding profusely from the ear, the eye orbit, his nose, and his mouth. And they can't stop it in gym class, so they rush him down to the nurse, who pulls his cart right away and finds out there's no hemophilia here in this family, so something is seriously wrong. And the kid starts to cry and say, maybe it's one of those 4 pills I took today. And she's like, what kind of pills were those? Well, those are energy pills. From whom did you get them? And then they run that pretty quickly down through the APs and the principal, and they end up with the kid who sold them, who produced the bottle, and it's the blood thinner Coumadin. And so they have to question every kid, 17 get to the hospital, 4 or 5 overnight because they take multiple pills, and they have to have a clotting agent like vitamin K injected into them. Why would 6th and 7th graders, buy a pill from some kid who's a known problem in the district, in the school, and take those pills without warning? Because this brain does not see those as possibly consequential, what bad things could happen to me, but rather how exciting is this, who's up there buying pills, I like that one, and so buys the pills also. So we know now that risk-taking in this brain, and peers, if there are peers that you like and admire, these risks are perceived as emotionally exciting and emotionally rewarding and far less consequential. If the consequence is distant, future physical consequence, even less, lower register on the radar. So if you're saying to kids, and if you smoke these cigarettes, by the time you're in your mid-50s, you're allowed to make you lose their elasticity, and the introduction of emphysema may begin. That brain it is impossible for young brains to project themselves that far into the future. And so risk is a different picture here. So even the way we talk about things, we need to be careful in our choice of turning something into, possibly attractive or appealing. So that's pretty fascinating. The other thing we're finding out is that almost all drugs that people like have some positive effect in brain chemistry. And that is that the drugs get into the emotional part of the brain and release dopamine and reward sites. And that's why people like them. Or the drugs get into parts of the brain that, like the beta-carboline system, that creates anxiety and suppress the anxiety or turn down frustration. So those things are what people use drugs for. I worked for quite a long time down in New York City in the drug and alcohol field. I worked for a place called Narcotic and Drug Research. And in fact, my office was up on the 67th floor of the 2 World Trade Center, before those buildings came down. But we would be out on the street all the time and listening for any new drug trends. And we would be interviewing we had people who were current drug abusers who also reported to us. What you didn't find were drugs that didn't get into the brain. The drugs that people wanted got into the emotional center of the brain. No one, I never, when I was on 34th Street, never heard anyone selling amoxicillin. Like, hey, I have some great amoxicillin. No, it's Colombian. No, it's just the best. Like, smoke this, you will never have strep throat. People didn't want that. It doesn't do enough. So the drugs we're going to talk about today are all drugs that get access to the young brain. Young brains, because they're so fascinating and have so much more gray matter subsets than our brains do. Adult brains are around 110 billion gray matter cells. Kids' brains can be upwards of 200 for this short period of what we call fluency, for this brain to need to learn everything it has to learn. That means there are far more sites for drugs to get access to in young brains. Far more sites, which is why they like them better than we like them. More powerful emotions, the excitement of risk-taking, and more sites of activity for these drugs to get into. So you have this really interesting subset of things that make these more attractive to young people than you and I are. And we also find out that now, I used to go to places, some place would call us up in the state of New York, and we'd go out and we'd find this little kind of pocket of bizarre drug use. So Rochester, New York, once they were kids in a middle school, spraying low-grade marijuana with Raid, the insecticide Raid, and smoking it, and one of them started having seizures, and that's how we discovered this. So I go out there to investigate this and find out it's a pre-contained pocket of, sort of the highly deviant kids. It's like you guys who works with middle school students. Okay, so you guys know, there'll be somebody who stayed back a couple of years. I remember when my kids went to middle school, my own, I had 2 boys, 2 girls. I always wanted to go to the middle school and get the list of kids who were driving to middle school because they were 16 and in the 8th grade. Their cohort group are 9th and 10th graders. So they often, on weekends and vacations, spend their time with their cohort group, but bring back those behaviors to the middle school. So they were smoking marijuana laced with Raid, which is exceptionally dangerous. I never found that again in any other community. Now, anything that happens out there, any discovery, that's why Roxanol, Roxys, and Opies, that's why we're seeing them sort of everywhere now across the country, because once somebody discovers how to, what's the 40 milligram, what's the color of the 40 milligram Roxanol? It's a little 8-sided pill. And so they'll go pinks or blues. So now they'll think, try these blues. You see it all over the stuff. And of course, all the stuff is readily available. And while you still see some things on Facebook, how many people in here have kids of their own? Can I see? And are willing to admit this in a public forum? Okay. How many of you have kids who have been on Facebook? Have their own Facebook account? How many of you as parents got your Facebook account? And then how many of you notice that your kid is hardly ever on anymore after you're on? Yeah, exactly. Because, we've taught them, and if you put that picture up there, some human resource person will see it 20 years from now and you will get that job, Well, now they use Snapchat, Now they use WhatsApp. Now they use other shorter media, digital techniques that don't leave it up there forever, but still transmit the information. This party, this drug, this high, this crew was doing all this. So we see, all of that available for them. So this is a different world. It's a different brain with different motivation. And drugs for these kids are pretty exciting and not often fear-producing. I just want to put this stuff up because I want us all to understand the motivation for developing, distributing, and selling drugs is money. There's no two ways about it. And the more money you can get, the more markets you can develop, the broader the distribution patterns of your drug, the better off you are. So while we are seeing heroin, that this is like the 5th cycle of heroin addiction in the United States. An interesting company in Germany, discovered heroin a year after they discovered another painkiller. So in 1897, a German pharmaceutical house learned how to synthetically take the inner bark of the willow tree and synthetically create acetylsalicylic acid. And they sold that compound with the name what? That was aspirin. And what was that company? That was Bayer. A year later, they discovered how to boil morphine in the presence of acetic anhydrous and create diacetylmorphine, which is named heroin. So one company owns the most widely used at that time, painkiller, aspirin, and the most powerful painkiller we've ever known, which is true to this day, heroin. So we're seeing the 5th cycle of heroin addiction in the United States, over the last 150 years or so. And this cycle is cheap, readily accessible heroin that we're finding used by tons of young adults and adolescents. Now, why would they do this? Well, it's all new to them. They don't have a history, and it meets the formats. But the same idea behind that is to make every new drug, palpable or exciting or intriguing to young people. So up on the top left is a caffeine-based product called AeroShots. AeroShots you can get in a lot of drugstores. You can buy them in gas stations. AeroShots, those little cylinders, there's 100 milligrams of powderized caffeine in there, and stevia to sweeten it, the artificial sweetener, and B12 for your health. So you can take an AeroShot, it costs $4, twist it, and then breathe in the 100 milligrams of caffeine. Most of it will melt down in your oral cavity, in your mouth, in your tongue. Some of it will go into your lungs. And so 100 milligrams of caffeine instantaneously, transported up into your brain. Particularly the pieces that get into your lungs are quick to get to the brain. It's like so much better than going to Starbucks and waiting in that line, and then buying the beverage and then getting back in your car and then drinking it slowly. That's like 20 minutes before the caffeine gets to you. This is 1 to 3 minutes before it's in your brain. So we're seeing middle school kids all over the country use these. You see them outside the schools, and you see a bunch of. Sometimes if you talk to your maintenance crew, your maintenance staff, they'll be sweeping these up, from the ground. Down below those are energy sheets. That's Cinnamon Rush here. That's another one with dissolvable caffeine. Melts in your mouth, picked up by all the capillaries in your oral mucus membranes inside your mouth, and delivered to your brain in about 1 to 3 minutes. Now, has anyone tested the effects of powderized caffeine inhaled into the lungs? Here's the answer to that: no. But we got a bunch of young people testing it for us. So these are commonly available stimulants that have a different format, and with a different format and a different route of administration, have more power. Look to the right, those are Camel strips, dissolvable tobacco, on the one on the left-hand side, and that's called Fresh. And to the right is Camel Sticks Mellow. That's a soy compound stick saturated with nicotine and tobacco. And see, most of these products are not for us. How many people are like, hey, I'll get one of them candlesticks on the way home, and just stick it in my mouth and chew that down. So those are not designed for us. They're designed for kids. Many of the drugs are designed for anybody who will buy them, but if you can target young people, and all this will go through the social media with kids instantaneously, the minute they try it, you'll see it. One of the other things we've seen is a lot of synthetic marijuana right now. Some of this I'm going to go through quickly for you because you don't really need to understand it at the chemical level, but a guy named John W. Huffman, that's his name down there, that's why you see JWH 073, 018, 200, 250. There are now 85 synthetic cannabinoids. And here's the thing to understand about that. Synthetic cannabinoids are the intoxicating compound that's in marijuana. We used to think there were 64. These researchers helped us understand there's 85 synthetic cannabinoids. We always talk about THC. There's a whole bunch of other ones we don't know anything about. We're finding out because they're making them. Once you develop a test for synthetic THC, they create another one called Nor11. You develop a test for Nor11, they create one called CB2. So these are hard to track, but are absent any organic matter. You're not finding, buds and leaves from marijuana. They don't need it. They're all synthetic. The only product that's organic is over there. Those are basically weeds and flowers ground up. All those things that next to that package, the only purpose they serve is to allow the liquid synthetic to be sprayed on something. So it will dry on you and you can smoke it. So you don't need any natural ingredients from marijuana to make synthetic cannabinoids. Yeah?
Are you aware of any tests you test for taking spices?
Sure, yeah. There's a number of companies that have developed tests. You have to be really careful because sometimes the company you have will say, oh yeah, we test for that, but they just do still the organic marijuana THC test. So you have to ask specifically for K2 or the other names that we'll talk about, synthetic cannabinoids, and that test will cost you more money. So it'll be a special test and it'll cost you more money. But yeah, they can. You have to specify it, yeah. John W. Huffman was, not a bad guy. He was trying to figure out how you could do animal research for pain management or appetite regulation. And the only reason he made synthetics, marijuana is not a compound that lab animals, so he's using these little rhesus monkeys. Lab animals do not gravitate towards marijuana. You can't get them to smoke it. You're like, here, have a hit on this. You had a hard day here in the lab, and they're like, no, I'm watching TV. And you're like, all the other rhesus monkeys are smoking this, why aren't you? And they won't. So you have to put them in glass cages, infuse the cage with marijuana, leave them in there for 3 minutes, and estimate how much did this animal internalize. John W. Huffman comes up with a liquid format you can spray on their food. And you can measure dose per dose how much each animal gets. Then you can find it inside their brains using any number of tools to look inside the rhesus monkey brain and see cannabinoid receptor sites. Humans have over 138 places in our brains that the cannabinoids go to. So here's these drugs out there, no human trials for these drugs, tested on primates, and these are names like this. Now there's over 80 names now. Serenity, Zohai, Spice Gold, Standard, Blonde, K2. All of them, it wasn't until like 2009 because they were under the radar. On the back it says, not for human consumption, for aromatherapy only, all of those kind of things. They got under the FDA radar. But in fact, they discovered synthetic cannabinoids, and it turns out now there's knockoffs. There's all kinds of these things out there available. And even though they're illegal, they're still sold online. You can still get them easily. The real difference is there's no way to tell how powerful they are. So you smoke a drug, you have rapid onset. Anytime you smoke a drug, it's the fastest way to get a drug into your system. Well, actually, that's not true. But the fastest way is direct cranial infusion. We have to get out the Makita drill the holes, put the tubes in, and drive it directly into your brain. Other than that, smoking a drug, look, you inhale the drug into your lungs, Your lungs have gazillions of spaces, and none of these little alveoli that run out, accept the drug as part of the oxygen intake, and then transfer that almost instantaneously. 1 to 2 seconds after drug is in your lungs, it's picked up by blood swinging from the right side of your heart, crossing your lungs, going to the left side of your heart, and then up to your brain. In 6 seconds, a drug you inhale is inside the brain. So why do people like smoking drugs? Because it is the fastest delivery system we have. What else? Your lungs are pretty big. So you have a lot of room for big doses. And very often, drugs that are smoked, with the exception we're going to talk about of heroin later, have more potency. So when you get a drug in like synthetic marijuana, now look at the difference. Because they're more powerful than standard marijuana, you'll often get the pupil on the left, which is the big dilated pupil. It's not the only drug that does that, but marijuana has a pretty good dilation of the pupil. In fact, on the right, what you're seeing is a constricted pupil. So these opioids we're going to talk about coming up, when we talk about the pills like Roxy or the Vicodin that's out there, or the heroin that's out there. When we talk about those, we're going to talk about one of the many symptoms is constricted or pinpoint pupils. That family of drugs, the opioids, relaxes voluntary muscles with such unbelievable potency that no voluntary or involuntary muscle works for you. So it takes energy to dilate your pupil and hold it open. When you don't have muscular energy in that eye, it's down to this tiny pinpoint, no matter what light conditions you are. So if there's a kid in your office or in the nurse's office or you picked up in the hallway, and the changing conditions of light should be causing normal dilation of that pupil, you're not going to get anything. So on the left it's marijuana, on the right that's the opioids. You know, you guys all know how people who are stoned, when any age group is stoned, there's a little delay between your interaction with them and their response to you. So you're like, because you're talking to 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds, you're like, I saw that movie Shooter last night, and you're like, yeah, that's pretty good, yeah, I like it. I like that when that, so they're there, it's in their head, but they're slow on the responsiveness. With synthetic marijuana, that slowdown is unbelievably low. So you'll be seconds before you get anybody home there. They'll respond, but it's like, where is the information? Let me code what somebody said to me. Let me get it in here. Let me fashion up my reply. And in some cases, they will forget what you said long before they can fashion their reply. So they'll say something back and it's not even related to you. Or because marijuana focuses attention on one thing, they'll forget everything else and focus on that one thing. And I've been to a million spring breaks. I go to spring break down a little island off the coast of Texas, called South Padre Island, where it's me and 250,000 college kids, and I'm the oldest person on that island by about 100 years. And I go to the clubs they go to, and I play hoop with the college kids in the daytime. And the college kids are so nice. They're like, throw the old guy a pass, Some of them are too nice. They're like, are you ready, old guy? I'm like, well, let me put my walker down first. I was like, yeah, I'm ready. But I meet some of them and I talk to them in the clubs, and you can tell, who's stoned by their response to the environment. So if you're talking to them, they're like, you hear the bass and that song. You're like, yeah, it's pretty good. No, that's like the best bass ever in the history of music. And you're like, yeah, I like the harmonies, The harmonies don't count. It's that bass. So when you have this single fixed focus, and the trail of empty Pringles containers, and this delayed response, you're looking at somebody, who you can say, well, and the dilated pupils, somebody's relatively intoxicated here. All of it's magnified with the synthetics, including hospitalization, because of their often panic attacks that they have with it. So you have, the kind of bouts of laughter that always happen with marijuana, these bigger distortions of color and sound, increased appetite, but now we're seeing pretty strong cognitive deficiencies. So giving them a set of tasks to do, you're wasting your time. Homework, are you kidding me? Doing assignments, getting things done, meeting you where they were supposed to meet you. So particularly any sequential stuff, maybe they're going to get the first step, and everything else is going up. 25% to 30% drop in active memory. What is fascinating, let's see if I come back to this in a minute. In vulnerable individuals, you can have, so look, when we say vulnerable individuals, we're talking about people who have a substrate already pre-existing of some kind of mental illness. The synthetics, any marijuana, but the higher the potency, the greater the outcomes, the negative outcomes. For vulnerable individuals, you may see suddenly what was subsurface straight turn out to be fluoride. So, and it reminds me that this is only with these new powerful forms of marijuana have we started to see this. But it reminds me of when I first was in this field years and years ago, like 30 years ago, and hearing a story or reading a story in the Boston Globe, for example, of how some kid went to college from a nearby high school in Cambridge, and at the college somebody put LSD into his drink or his snack or whatever at a party, and he's been in a psychiatric ward ever since. And then they would interview the parents, and the parents would be like, oh, our boy Tim, was an angel and so sweet, and, then they did this to him. Then you go interview Tim's teachers, and Tim's teachers, and the middle school teachers are like, yeah, Tim, weird little guy. Killed all the crayfish in the science lab one year, And then you interview the 5th grade teacher, and they're like, yeah, all the other kids were afraid of Tim, because he was drawing pictures of them with an axe in their heads, And so you find out that he wasn't normal, and he wasn't an angel, and there was an underlying substrate of something in there, and that drug made it forward, and he's not coming back. And we don't know often who those vulnerable individuals are, but some of them are going to find out that they had an underlying vulnerability, because this more powerful form is going to turn that up, and they're going to be different people from then on. And we know that teens are more likely to use drugs to escape depression. But the two first choices are generally alcohol and marijuana. And while both of those drugs will very briefly attenuate depressive affect in kids, briefly. So some kids go to a party, kids depressed, they don't want to be at the party, they want to isolate, or their friends convince them to go. They have a hit on somebody's blunt of marijuana, and for the next 45 to 50 minutes, their depression lightens. And the trap here, of course, is that if it happens based on an irregular, transient, brief use of marijuana, may in fact alleviate depression temporarily. Their perception of that event is that if this is what happened when I did a little bit on Friday night, if I do more, 3 times a week, my depression will disappear. No, in fact, your depression will deepen. Marijuana will suppress the neurochemical, there's a whole family of them, but serotonin will be suppressed, and worse, marijuana absolutely interferes with the efficacy of antidepressants in the SSRI family. So I don't know how many kids I've talked to where they're like telling me, Mr. N, I'll call me, I'm on my 5th antidepressant, my stupid doctor gave me, and every one is like 3 doses, and none of them work. It's just a waste of money, a waste of my time. And I say, how much weed are you smoking? And they're like, oh, well, kind of a lot. Like I do 2 bowls every night, before I go to bed, I'm doing a blunt a day. And I say, so here's the deal, Aaron, it's never going to happen that these medications are going to work for you, because the weed you're smoking is preventing that medication from working. And I will tell you, universally, this is why I love kids, universally they will ask me, so Mr. N, when do you think you can create a medication where weed doesn't bother it, And I say, I do not know the answer to that. But I know the answer for you is this. If you want your depression to lift, if you want to feel good about life, have some energy, feel some power over the events in the course of your life's trajectory, then you have to figure out a way to decrease the amount of marijuana you're smoking down to nothing, and let that medication, and I'd like to say to their parents, and talk therapy along with an exercise program, work to help you overcome this depression. And it's the hardest sell ever. I can tell you, the focus of attention with marijuana, where kids get into one thing, I've talked to 1,000 kids who've said to me, when I go to school stoned, I don't get in trouble. Because I focus on look at those clouds going by. That one looks like a whale. Oh, look at that one. That looks like a whale. So the whole class, they're looking at clouds. But what are they not doing? Disrupting the class, being overly impulsive, getting in trouble. So I'll say, you didn't get in trouble that day. And you're like, yeah. I said, did you learn anything? Because it's really hard to learn under the influence of marijuana since it suppresses memory. And they say, you see, that's not the big deal with me. The big deal is not getting sent to the AP's office. It's just fascinating to see them that they say, if I go to school straight, I'm in trouble the whole day. If I go to school stoned, everybody thinks I'm good. So now we want them to acquire some other techniques, but that's medication for feelings at its purest form in a maladaptive way to deal with it. So it's just unbelievable what we see going on with this. Look, always you have higher potency, you have more sites of activation, they're activated longer, you have a higher risk for dependency. And that's just true. Caroline Haney, a researcher at Columbia, also can already demonstrate addiction to marijuana in the sense that it has, she's doing it with graduate students, and what we call captive subjects. You keep them in the lab. So much better than the research in the past. Research in the past, there was research, when I first started, one big university did research on how long can marijuana last in someone's system and still get a positive urinalysis for it. It was like the worst research in the history of drug research. They advertised on campus for heavy marijuana users. Okay, so we want heavy marijuana users to come in. We're going to ask you to smoke marijuana that we're going to give you. And then we're going to give you money after that. Smoke this marijuana, wait 4 hours, then come back the next 3 days and we're going to urine test you. Okay? And then they would give the money and they'd say, oh, but in the meantime, you heavy marijuana smokers whom I have just given money to, please don't smoke any more marijuana. And they were going to keep them until they didn't test positive anymore. So they had someone like 78 days. And like, wow, marijuana stays in a person's system forever. See, no it doesn't. But if you recruit heavy marijuana smokers and give them money, it will seem like it stays in their system for days because they'll be smoking marijuana every night, and twice in the afternoon before they come to your lab. So we do it way better now. Caroline Haney keeps them in and finds out there's tolerance. Within 5 to 7 days, the young people in her study are complaining about the quality of the marijuana. Where'd you get this weed? It sucks. You have the same exact potency. There's 4 universities that have marijuana plantations, by the way, that guarantee us a standard potency. And when they quit and they volunteer after 3 weeks, after 4 weeks, they'll go through, I'm going to quit. They measure the metrics of withdrawal. So what does marijuana do for most kids? Lowers anxiety. What are these kids? Agitated and anxious. What does marijuana do for most kids? Steps them back one step from reality. They're like, why are you in here? Like, oh, okay, it's science. So let's do it and get out. So they're agitated, they're anxious, they feel like they're being intruded upon, their personal space, the questions you're asking me. It's fascinating to watch this. So when you get higher levels of anxiety, more agitation, restlessness, and more conflict. It's a measurable withdrawal sequela, and it lasts 7 to 10 days. They have this fascinating stuff, a compulsion to use. She gives them free choice how much you want to use. She sees not only tolerance, I need more to get the same high, but I'm going to use it 5 times a day. Don't you have to watch football high? Yeah, because I don't want to say anything about the Browns because they did a really good job. But then you can learn to deal with your disappointment from it. Loss of control, how much will I use and when will I use it? And finally, anybody who's suspended kids, who's gotten kids into treatment program, who's had kids kicked off teams, who's had kids in front of the adolescent drug court judges, anybody who's done that knows that this component, I will continue to use this drug no matter what you do to me, is the highlight of addictive nature. And that's what we're seeing. So we know that marijuana has that. And we know we're having high risk for anybody stoned operating vehicles. A measurable impact on memory and learning. I want to highlight that for one more minute. So look, in studies on marijuana, so you have graduate students coming in, and you have your non-marijuana smoking group, and kids who smoke marijuana in graduate school. And you don't give them marijuana. So this is one of Caroline Haney's. I'm not giving it to you, but you can smoke before you come to the project every week. They come to the project every week, she gives them a test. In the middle of the test, they ask all of them, a researcher goes up and says, how do you think you're doing on this test? The non-marijuana smokers like, yeah, pretty good, but I found number 4 hard. They bias the questions. 4, 5, and 8 are extremely difficult in this test. But it turns out, not only does marijuana have an impact on memory, on the left side of the brain is a place called critical self-observation. Marijuana turns that off. So they ask the young people, how are you doing this test? The non-marijuana smokers are like, oh, I don't know, I don't think I got 4 right. You ask the marijuana smokers, how are you doing this test? They're like, I'm killing this test. Like, nobody's doing better on this test than me. What do they get wrong? 4, 5, and 8. They have them come back the next day, they do a tutoring for everybody. Well, you got 4 wrong, here's how you get 4 right. You get 5 wrong, here's how you get 5 right. You get 8 wrong, here's how you get right. Next week they bring them back, retest them. Basic same test, they change the questions to 3, 7, and 9. Halfway through the test. How are you doing? The non-marijuana is better. I think I got that one that I had trouble with last time. The marijuana smoker's like, I thought I was killing this last week. I'm super killing this test tonight. You're gonna have to give me bonus points. What did they get wrong? 3, 7, and 9. How come? Can't learn how to fix their mistakes, unable to see their errors, or judge themselves in any way as not competent on this. It's fascinating. Ask your kids who are stoned how they do in school. They'll tell you great. You say, I was looking at you, tell you got a D, C- in this. That teacher hates me. So it's this fascinating deal. And more paranoia, the higher the potency, the greater the potential for paranoia and psychotic break. And if anybody in here has worked with young people, so I'm with a group of kids, and one of them's like, so I have this question for you. What are they mixing in with marijuana? And I said, tell me what's behind that question. Like, well, I smoked weed with my friends the other night, and I got really paranoid about it. And I said, did anybody else get paranoid? And they're like, no, but they didn't take hits as big as I did. So here's the deal, they're having an adverse effect of marijuana. And if your brain is aversive to marijuana, in that it creates paranoia for you, it will always create paranoia for you. So did anybody else have paranoia? No, just you. Yeah, I think somebody put something in my head, Were you all smoking out the same pipe or the same blunt? Yeah, but maybe they put it in the middle of the blunt just when I picked it up. That is you and marijuana. So the more you use, the more paranoia you're going to have. Now look, there's situational marijuana. Anybody can, because you focus on one thing. So if you're 15 and you're walking with a friend and you just get stoned, you're in a school building, and one of the local police officers backs in to a place to radar cars and stop them, you're not going to see the big picture. You're going to think he backed in to wait for you to walk by. That's situational paranoia. I know we're high. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. Don't walk like you're hiding. I'm not. You are. So you have this situational focus. For these young people, potential paranoia and psychotic break gets higher risk with the synthetics. And the testing does require specialized and sophisticated drug testing. Let me mention this quickly. The only reason we're seeing this is because several celebrities have been found passed out unconscious or in trouble at clubs. And anybody remember one of them? One of them was out with her 23-year-old daughter. She was doing nitrous oxide hits, 5 bottles of 5-hour energy drinks, and smoking Wicked X, which is a marijuana substitute, no real marijuana in it. And then she had seizures on one of the floors, fell right down on the floor. One of the clubs had seizures and was rushed to the hospital. Who knows who that is? This is a couple of years ago now because her then boyfriend, maybe husband, I don't know, had broken up with her. Demi Moore, that's right, because, what's his name? Ashton, that rat, ditched her for someone I think more age appropriate. and started dating that person. And so she goes out, here's her medication for feelings. Drinking, Wicked X, nitrous oxide, 5-hour energy drinks. And there's a surprise that she's seizing on the floor of the club. Well, Wicked X used her picture as a marketing tool for about 8 months until she threatened to sue them to take the picture off the site. So this is an industry, and these are not real marijuana things at all, but they do have a blend of herbal compounds that may include a couple of things that are dangerous. Damiana is a sedative, and yerba mate is a stimulant. So nobody knows what's the blend, what's the balance. Nobody knows. These things are all sold, by and large, through the internet. A little bit of mental stimulation, a little bit of laughing, but then kids start to feel disconnected. Mostly that's a Damiana effect. So you get a risk when you're disconnected from everybody. Are you walking home with the group? Are you straggling behind? Do you put yourself at risk? I love it that they'll sell not for human consumption, and on the same page you'll see the vaporizers. So are you finding vaporizers with the kids in this community? Anybody who's in the drug field, We're seeing a lot of vaporizers nationwide because they're being sold as the healthy alternative to marijuana smoking. Don't smoke marijuana. Pyrolyzing vegetative matter can be dangerous to your lungs. See, but if you put weed up in that cup, the metal cup there, that's an electric device, you turn that on, that heats the marijuana to 320 degrees. No flame, no burning vegetative matter, but the resin on the buds vaporizes at about 310 degrees. So that glass fills up with a warm resin. It looks like little white smoke. It's not smoke. It's a resin. It's a vapor. And so they inhale that in through that hose, and it has a cleaner, higher hit because it doesn't compete. Look, when you burn marijuana, you get over 4,000 chemicals. When, instead of burning marijuana, when you vaporize it, you get about 700 chemicals. Fewer chemicals for the cannabinoids to compete with. Cleaner high, more powerful high, and very popular these days. They're making car adapters for these now. So you can buy them. All right, you don't know what's in them. We are seeing loaded blunts out there that have herbal marijuanas, but fakes, plus heroin, that's H-bomb. A lot of heroin showing up in marijuana right now, a smokable form of heroin. Cocoa puffs, that's cocaine in marijuana. Methamphetamine, that's M&Ms, smokable methamphetamine in marijuana. And ketamine, that's Clickens or Special K. And just recently, we're starting to see marijuana dipped into, this is a return of an old pattern, marijuana dipped into embalming fluid. So fry sticks or wets. So any email messages you intercept or notes you find or whatever about wets or fry sticks or things like that, that's an extremely dangerous, brain-damaging form of marijuana use dipped into embalming fluid. Or if you're finding weed in one of the schools anywhere wrapped in aluminum foil, you don't put blunts or joints that have been soaked in embalming fluid in plastic. The embalming fluid degrades the plastic that be wrapped in foil. So if you see that, you're looking at some little different thing here. Salvia divinorum. So again, what the kids will talk about when they're talking to each other is going to a party is Sally D coming. And you're all like, who is this Sally D? She's so popular. Well, this is Salvia divinorum. Not the kind of salvia you buy at Home Depot or Lowe's, in the spring playing around your yard. This is a particular kind that just grew. Most of it only grew in one province in central Mexico. Oh, that was 10 years ago. Now they're growing it in greenhouses up and down the whole West Coast in Florida, and it's legal in most states. So it is the dried leaf that you see up there that's smokable. There's a little compound in it called salvinorum A that causes brief delusional or hallucinatory experiences. And they're weird. They're like mild to moderate stimulation for 5 to 10 minutes, and people almost always have extended bouts of laughter. And of course, Miley Cyrus, the wonderful role model for our young women, and on her 18th birthday was a YouTube video that has over 4 million hits now, of young people watching Miley Cyrus smoke salvia on her birthday, fall on her side and laugh uncontrollably for about 5 to 7 minutes. That's the most common experience, but it is not the only one. Other experiences are fearfulness. They get extremely agitated and fearful, and unpredictability. So if you were to, when you go back to your office, there's a site, you'll go on Google and type in bad salvia trips. Actually, wait until one of your colleagues is away from their workstation, and then go sit at their workstation and type in bad salvia trips. When you type in bad salvia trips there, you take a look at that. Pick the one that says, young man falls out second story window. Pick that one. And you're going to see how salvia is unbelievably unpredictable. But he's sitting with his girlfriend on the couch. And he climbs off the couch and falls out the window. And she continues to sit there and do these kind of stereotypical, she keeps straightening out her sleeves. People get off the couch and try to straighten out the couch cushion. They do all these weird things, but they're often uncoordinated and often fearful. And in Columbus, Ohio, several years ago, at the university on Pledge Week, you guys had a young man, not you guys, but in Columbus, Ohio, there was a young man go to a pledge night at a fraternity. You know how pledge works, the rush, come back after for the real party, comes back at 1 o'clock, smoking salvia, runs out onto one of the big arteries runs right through town and is killed. 2 o'clock in the morning. And at NYU, a freshman goes to spring fling at one of the NYU tower dorms. They're like 21 stories. He's down on the 7th floor at a party, smokes salvia, right up to the balcony, over the balcony to his death. No suicide here. A discoordinated, disconnected, unpredictable behavioral outcome from salvia. So salvia is very, very unpredictable. It's legal. You'll see it around. Sometimes, it's just, a high risk because of their depth perception problems and their impulsiveness. So yeah, look that up and you'll see, high risk. I will tell you, most of the things you're going to see are college fraternity houses or college dorms. Where I have 2 boys, 2 girls. And my youngest daughter just graduated. She's the last one to graduate. She graduated from St. Lawrence University. And almost always, not exclusively, but almost always, it's some freshman or sophomore female on campus coming to a dorm. And there's like 6 guys, and they're going to smoke salvia. Are you finding that, Michelle?
Sorry.
Are you finding bad salvia trips? No. I thought you were finding that site.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, okay. Well, you can do homework in here, Michelle, but that's all. So you'll see is young women going to these, but I have not heard any somebody sexually assaulted them. But what I see over and over again, how can you watch so many videos? Because what they want to do is film the person on salvia. That's like the big thing. And I will tell you how many kids I've seen stand up from the couch and fall and miss the coffee table corner by this much. My wife is telling me, they can't hear you because I'm often yelling at the television saying, move the coffee table, because you can see this coming. How many videos aren't put up because the kid hit the coffee table, and is hospitalized from head injuries. So it's uncoordinated, high risk, and a very popular drug with limit testing. This is not big in the high school or middle school thing, thank God, but bath salts, which are not for the bath at all, but are powerful stimulants. Look, this is an ad on one of the websites for it. But these aren't bath salts. How many people in here are like, oh, I think I'll have a bath tonight and put some bath salts in them. First, I'll make 4 lines on the mirror, of the bath salts. Then I'll snort them up with this dollar bill and blow them back into the tub, So when you see this, you know it is not for the bath, but in fact, these are powerful stimulants that can be snorted, smoked, consumed orally, or injected, and many of them come from the Philippines, from China. They're coming in under the radar, so they'll be coming in sold as plant foods. but they have this compound called mepredrone in them, which is highly, highly stimulatory and extremely dangerous. It's a really dysregulator, a strong dysregulator. A new one called MDPV, which will be sold in things like these jars. The first bath salts I saw were about 6 years ago on a college campus in a Tupperware container with a little piece of paper that said bath salts on it. And the college kids are showing it to me. I'm like, where'd you get these? Like, oh, my cousin got it. He said, that's just a pretty sketchy place and he bought this. So the kid opens it up and it reeks. The ammonia, urea smell is unbelievably strong in there. And it was all chunky and it was really, really a coarse product. And one of the kids was like, I would never put this in the bath. Like, it would ruin my parents' bathtub. So I'm like, what are you going to do with it? And they're like, we're going to snort it. So I'm like, okay, am I the only one hearing that this is too dangerous for the finish in your parents' nice, circular bathtub? You would never dare to do that. Yet, you will, because you think perhaps your nasal mucosa is stronger than porcelain or fiberglass, and you will snort this up. And they're like, yeah, And so we see a lot of nasal mucosa damage, but we see real risk factors in terms of high-risk, aggressive behaviors here. MPTV is more powerful than Ritalin, so it's often perceived as a great party enhancer. I have a ton of energy, I can dance all night, much like ecstasy does. Those are two top ones are both illegal, but TFMPP is a newer one that is legal, more hallucinogenic, less stimulatory, so your behavioral troubles come from your thinking something's after you as opposed to being aggressive. And the newest one is called Gravel. So Gravel is out there, and it's a powerful stimulant. You never know what's in them. They come from China. Look, 78% of the Chinese residents do not trust their country's meat supply. 84% of the Chinese residents do not trust their country's milk supply. Why would somebody buy unregulated drugs made in China? 4 young men in North Dakota were rushed to the hospital and admitted they're there about a month with dialysis because of a compound called aniline, which is a huge toxic contaminant in many Chinese drugs. But see, what do we talk about? That risk is not, I don't say, what's the consequence? I say this new drug, Gravel, sensory deprivation. So you have someone who's paranoid, who cannot feel pain. You have someone then hard to manage behaviorally. They can fall, get up and run on a broken ankle. They can be extremely dangerous to manage. So that's going on. High rate of blood pressure, stimulation, restlessness. So you'll be food, you won't be eating, and you won't be sleeping. That causes further deregulation in the young brain here. At first, it's all euphoria and excitement, increased sexuality, manic behaviors, repetitive behaviors, followed by unpredictable agitation, fearfulness, sleep deficiencies, and what we're going to call aggressive paranoia. Somebody's looking at you, somebody's going to take your stuff. What's somebody doing in this dorm room? Really, really good. So I was on a ride along with parole officers up in California one time, and we were looking for guys on parole who go back cooking meth. And so I go with the guy to this trailer, because he might, the helicopter flight showed brown fields behind his trailer with the toxic compounds. So he's on parole. We go there. The first thing the guy opens it about 4 inches wide, and knows the parole officer, but fixes on me. Who's he? And the whole time, because the guy didn't let us in, we had to go get a warrant to get in place. Now, I don't go in for a warrant. I'm on a ride along. But the guy's focused on me, and then after like a minute of being reassured that I'm not dangerous, you stand at the door, and he keeps looking past me. I'm telling you how contagious that is, because like in 2 minutes I'm looking behind me because like I want to know who's running up behind me with the axe. Because so you have this feeling of impending catastrophe. And these drugs create that with often terribly violent outcomes. Psychosis, seizures, coma, suicides, fatalities. Both MAM fails are drawn to these things, but we'll see somewhat different levels of suicide attempts. Sometimes the females are more likely to take the pills, the males are more likely to engage the community in the suicide. So suicide by cop, getting in their car and running into traffic, more aggressive ways that they kill themselves. All illegal except for TMF. The testing again is specialized. So how about Molly? Has anybody heard anything about Molly? Molly, see, look, young people love to believe in the street mythology. Well, all drug addicts do. So when I was down in the city and we were studying drugs like China White, which is a synthetic heroin, it's fentanyl, but so a synthetic drug that was being marketed as unbelievably pure heroin. And people want the myth, they want to believe it. So they were being told, it's being grown in the highlands of China, recently discovered fields of opiums that, have never been used. I know, handled only by the virgins of the local tribe, and then sent here to the Lower East Side for your use. And people just love that stuff. So Molly is supposed to be this unadulterated, purest form of ecstasy with no, zero side effects. The purer any drug is, the more powerful the side effects are. It's basic chemistry, psychopharmacology. Second, that's number one. And ecstasy side effects are often hyperthermia. Body temperature starts running up to 105, 107, followed by seizures, and sometimes followed by failure, by death. The other side effects, dehydration, and also, besides that, a higher risk of side effects is often the contamination. So here's a pill that somebody turned into one of our testing agencies, Mollylicious, the most pure form of ecstasy ever, except this has 6 other drugs in it, and not just ecstasy. So it's a wonderful myth, but it's not, in fact, true. Some contaminants will be in these that will cause failure and hospitalization. All right, this is another new one. You're not going to see too much of this, and I hope you don't see it at all. But this is one called Smiles, or 2CI. It's coming out of China. The fatal events have been based on contaminants in it. So, let's see, there was a young actor, and I'm not going to remember his name. Okay, so who knows the show, The Sons of Anarchy? I know some of you do because I saw your tattoos when you came. Sons of Anarchy is last season coming up. One of the young actors was a budding star. After 2 years on the show, died from this 2CI stuff. But it was the contaminant in it that killed him, because no one knows what is in these things. Nobody knows. We're getting a return to dimethyltryptamine, DMT. That was a drug from the 60s. It's coming back. It's crystallized white crystals. Again, somebody may tell you this is DMT. It may be that, maybe not. That's very short. The reason it's called businessman's lunch is the high lasts about 45 minutes. So in the 60s, people would go out for lunch, get high, and then come back to work an hour later. Like, how's lunch? Is great. I was in Thailand, and so this kind of drug is coming back. Nutmeg is a hallucinogen. It has a compound called myristicin, which is pretty hallucinogenic. It's long-lasting. The side effects, though, make it unpalatable to most people. You have to learn to swallow nutmeg. You have to get used to it. If you take a big dose of it, you will engage in something that the research is called projectile vomiting, which is why we advise no face-to-face confrontations with people you think are using nutmeg, because you want to be several feet away from them and to the side. But you can teach yourself to do it, and many young people have. That's a powerful hallucinogenic. We are still, however, seeing the #1 drug of every adolescent who's interested in changing, medicating for their feelings as alcohol, based on, listen, in communities like you live in, you're going to see a high level of alcohol use in the parental subset every weekend. the socialization around alcohol, the celebrations around the use of alcohol, the management of your mood states around the use of alcohol, the diminishment of conflict. How do you make that conflict go away? You have a cocktail. So you're going to see a ton of role modeling. In affluent communities, we often have higher levels of alcohol use among adolescents than in communities that we say are depressed or struggling. There's a ton of things. Now, look, adolescent brains, they don't process alcohol well, liver enzymes aren't there. In fact, the government made everyone who made childhood medication 15 years ago. The FDA said you have to take alcohol out as the solvent because young liver function is slow to metabolize alcohol, and the alcohol gets a longer chance to stay in, attack cells, and damage organs. However, one of the things young people like about it is the lower level of hangover. So they don't get the hangover that we have. They get the damage without the hangover. Duke University found that out. Low negatives, high positives, if they're genetically at risk, they're 1/3 to 1/2 as likely to become, in fact, alcohol abusers and alcoholics. If they have an environment, this is an enzyme that genetically puts people at risk for alcohol abuse. If they have an environment where they're seeing drinking role model, like I talked about earlier, they're more likely, in any of these settings, a family that's promotional of alcohol use is suffering from any mental health or emotional disorders, struggling in school based on learning disorders or school failure. And look, some learning disorders are not learning disorders. So can you guys tell me, like in the state of Ohio, what is the day that you have to be the age to start kindergarten? Is it like September 1, December 1? I don't care, which one do you think it is? Somebody just make up a date for me. September 30th. Okay, so here's a study. I'll show you this fascinating study. If you are September 29th boy, you'll be the youngest kid in your kindergarten class. But if you're the October 2nd boy, you'll be the oldest kid in your class. So in a study recently done on ADHD diagnoses, it turns out that the September babies are 45% more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than the October boys. How come? Because they all have ADHD? We don't think so. We think one boy is 11 months, 3 weeks younger than the other one when he's in kindergarten or the first grade. And that developmental difference will be misinterpreted as, one, and for boys in particular. Boys, it turns out, need twice the amount of physical space and twice the amount of activity to be comfortable in any learning environment. Well, look how many second grade classrooms the chairs are all lined up. And every day in that second grade, Miranda says, Miss Wilson, Cody is pushing my chair with his feet. Cody, you stop that. Miss Wilson, Allison says behind him, Cody's putting his stuff on my desk. Cody, you stop that. By the third time, Miss Wilson comes down and says, Cody, we are taking your chair and your desk, we're moving your desk over here, away from everybody, like we have to do every day. And Cody's like, well, thank God. Now I finally have the space and the activity I need to learn. I just wonder why we have to go through this day after day, to get me in a position where I can learn. And now, well, I got some news for Cody, because I know what his diagnosis is going to be coming up. So is it a real learning disorder, and are we addressing it, or are we misidentifying something? And that's a real issue for kids. What else we see? Look at these new alcohol products. So look at the one on the right-hand side, the Snow Bar. Okay? That Snow Bar is 14.6% alcohol, but it's 100% cool. So give me some, That's a Cosmo Pop Snow Bar. Because don't almost all adults that on a Friday after a hard week at work say, let's stop and pick some of those Snow Bars up, because nothing I like better than bringing some Cosmo Pops home for my partner and I to enjoy after dinner. On the left, because of the cupcake craze, that's frosting that's 15% alcohol. Okay? What do you want? What product would you like? Pocket shots? Mylar bags. Mylar bags. So because I go to concerts all the time. I love concerts. And when I go to concerts, I get patted down just like the kids do. Most of them are looking for my defibrillator or something. So like I get patted down and they're like, go ahead, you know. These are Mylar bags, not cans, not bottles. They're soft to the touch. They come in 2 drink size or 4 drink size. They have whiskey, rum, vodka, gin, and tequila. And you have this little peel opener near the top, and you can put a straw in or drink it. It's like unbelievable. What do you want? Whipped cream, 15% alcohol. Jello shots, 25% alcohol. Alcohol, who knows what alcohol is? Do I have a picture? Yes, I do. Alcohol is powdered alcohol. Why stick with the feta cheese on your salad, when you can put some powdered alcohol on your salad? So you think you have trouble finding alcohol on kids in your school building now? Okay. Here's some interesting future for us, alcohol. Malt beverages, let me just talk about this briefly. So look at this stuff. Does that look like beer to you? That's beer. That's malt brewed beverages. They're 7 to 13% alcohol by volume, and they're 20 to 24 ounces. And and I love it, because when you look at the bottom of these containers at the back, it says, and 2 amino acids for your health. So this is all designed for a young palate, sugars, sweeteners, fruit taste, and it's like taking Coke 45 from 25 years ago, putting sugars in it, fruit flavors in it, making the can bigger, and doubling its potency to 13%. So young systems with alcohol in it have far more interesting damage. We are seeing robo shots. So the cough suppressant dextromethorphan is a synthetic opioid. And this is often the first trip into the opioids for young people. But if you combine a half a can of beer and you chug a bottle of Robitussin, that is like getting 8 to 10 cans of beer in 15 minutes. And that is a ton of alcohol and a ton of intoxication. We have had kids nationwide on weekends fall off the 3rd level of some mall when their friends come in, at the bottom, and they cell phone them, they're like, we just came in through this section, and the kid leans over to look. You get the sudden onset here of 3-dimensional spatial relationships, dysfunction, you come cartwheeling off that and you die, at the core of the mall on the tile or cement that's down below. So we're seeing a lot of that hard to test for because it disappears so quickly. You can be delusional with it. You're seriously a drunken kind of delusional high-risk factor. There's the OxyContin. We don't see as much in terms of crushing it. We still see it swallowed, but there's Vicodin. So there's Roxanol. And that we're seeing way more of crushed up. That color pill right there. Look at Opana. All the colors representing different doses. So that's a big one now. Opies and Roxys they're coming to your town. Well, I don't know why that's on your town. I have to get rid of that. We do see heroin and alcohol quite a bit now, and we are seeing with the heroin, we start with smoking. Except, remember I said smoking is the fastest way in? It still is. However, when you smoke heroin, it's one of the few drugs where the smoking process destroys about 20% to 25% of the drug. Once you get addicted to heroin, you don't want to give up 25% of that drug. Half of the people who started out smoking heroin, half of them will end up injecting within 2 years. So, and they all say the same thing, I'll never inject, never, never, never. Yeah, it happens will. There's a ton of unknowns, the cuts, the potencies. Heroin can show up in any of those flavors here. White powders, brown powders, dark powders, pills up the top, those pills on that scale there, that's half fentanyl, a hospital anesthetic, which is in the opioid family, and half heroin. Down here on the right is cheese. On the right, cheese is Mexican heroin mixed with crushed up Tylenol PM and added dry baby formula added into it. What's the potency of cheese? No one knows. How much Tylenol PM was in there? You know, how much dry baby formula? What was the initial potency of the heroin? Nobody knows the answer to that. Somebody's going to find out, you know, when they take it. The thing that you're, you know, closing in, just come over a few states and you guys are going to see this one. This is crocodile. So crocodile is a compound called desomorphine, which is when codeine pills are crushed and cooked up and chemically altered with either iodine, solvents, or gasoline. Unfortunately, just like the meth cookers, if you go into a meth lab, it is the filthiest place you have ever been in your life, except for crocodile labs. Crocodile labs are dirty, disgusting, contaminated with bacteria, fungal agents, viruses, because once people get addicted to it, they're driven to cook and not clean. And I'm not talking about household cooking, I'm talking about their lab. So you get a lot of contaminants. Now, I'm going to show you another slide here, now this is a warning here. Many of the contaminants are bacteria that causes necrotizing fasciitis. So do not look at this picture if you are not one to manage ugly pictures. This is a picture of a young woman holding her arm up where necrotizing fasciitis has killed much of the flesh and muscle on her arm. This is before her operation to have that arm amputated. Now remember we started by saying young people want the high and the suppression of bad emotions. Nobody says, I want to start smoking crack or injecting crack to end up with an arm amputation. That's the consequence. But that's not what draws them in. That's not where they think this is going. So here's an ugly picture. This is a real picture of somebody's arm. That's coming off right above the elbow, about 4 inches above the elbow. That arm is going to be surgically removed. And it is an unbelievable event that no one can foresee, except it's coming. Not to everyone, but to a lot of them. So, you know, with the opioids, we have addiction, infections everywhere, you know, from the skin to the necrotizing, to the vascular system, to the right mitral valve of the heart, every potential for kidney disease, everything is in it with the opioids when someone's injecting, and fatality. And because you have no idea of the potency of that drug, or you might drink alcohol on top of that drug, the risk for overdose is substantial. So is anybody in the medical field in here, any school nurses in here? So you guys know about the nasal spray with Narcan? So do you have them in your office? Do they let you have them? So we're seeing actually many states are, the Department of Education is allowing for districts to make individual decisions about Narcan. Narcan is a nasal spray that is a narcotic or opioid antagonist and stops the overdose. Do you know if your emergency guys are carrying it? Do you know if the police are or the emergency first responders? There's no reason you should know. Yeah, so now we're seeing it, a lot of times we're seeing it in police cars. We're seeing it in every, ambulance run, because the nasal spray with an unconscious kid potentially failing from opioid overdose is pretty easy to administer. And I mean, that's where we are with how many of the opioids and how often, particularly affluent and upper middle class communities are completely blind to this, at the parental level, completely blind to this. So I worked with a parent set who actually paid for me to come and work in the high school their son had attended before he died from an overdose of the opioids. And at one point, the mother was doing his clothes and found $8,700 in $100 bills in his jacket pocket. And didn't think that this was something she should ask questions about. Since he was a smart boy on the honor roll, already accepted at MIT, and so he must have had a legitimate reason for it. His legitimate reason is that he was the oxy dealer in his high school and died from an OxyContin overdose about 2 weeks after she found the money. So it is so easy to not see this, because who would believe, that our kids would be doing it? Well, listen, 46 people will die today from the fatal overdose. 46 people will die today. For the alcohol, 13 more teens alone will die today. Let me do this one pretty quick because I got to get out of here. Alcohol and caffeine is a real high risk with the kids because, two systems are activated. So people think out like the caffeine, counteracts alcohol. No. What happens is this instead. Harvard University did a study they called the wide awake drunk study. You get the alcohol making you drunk and the caffeine making you wide awake. But you don't, in fact, you feel energized, but you're uncoordinated. You lose glucose in your motor cortex. You can't walk. You lose glucose in your visual cortex. That's why you killed the kid on the bike when you were driving. They said, I didn't see him. You didn't see him because you stopped your brain. But you thought you could drive because of the caffeine. So you get this real high risk. 35% of all crashes are alcohol related. 60% of all fatalities, boats are alcohol related. Biking, skateboarding, swimming, hikes, parties, all of that with alcohol, much higher risk. And the caffeine makes people say, I can do this. I'm on top of it, but you're twice as likely to suffer physical injury. Now, here's what the kids do. So juice and Four Loko used to have caffeine in them. The government made them take them out. So now kids buy Four Loko or juice, which is no caffeine, trade shots, three of them take shots and they pour 5-hour energy drinks inside. So, or you can take apart, you take your dissolvable sheets and throw 5 of them in there. So you can caffeinate your alcohol, which kids have learned to do themselves. Twice as likely to get in fights, twice as likely to be either a victim or perpetrator of sexual assault. By the way, on non-published studies, on college football teams, male football teams, there are girls teams, male football teams, those numbers change into 4 times as likely to get in a fight and 4 times as likely to be a victim or perpetrator of sexual assault. And if anybody saw the video of Ray Rice punching his fiancée, not only was that horrendous, for me, equally as horrendous was his, what I believe was depraved indifference after she was unconscious. Where you see her dragged out of the elevator, basically thrown onto the floor and disregarded by him, in terms of her physical state. So when we're talking about, if you teach aggression, to young people because you want, and I say, I want this. I want my team, I coach wrestling, I want my team to display their skills at full intensity for the entire time they're out there. See, that's what I want. Skills, intensity, and persistence. That's what I want. I don't want smashing them up. That's not the same kind of thing. And so when you have a drug that disinhibits like alcohol and a drug that increases aggressiveness like high-dose caffeine, you have a pretty interesting recipe for people to get hurt. All right, last but not least, and middle school people, where's my middle school people today? Okay, so look, I'm in this middle school. See, that's a 2-liter bottle of Germex. I'm in this middle school, and there's this nice middle school teacher, and she's like, I'm like, ooh, that's a big bottle of hand sanitizer on the side table by her desk. And she's like, oh, my 8th grade boys, they're like so interested in sanitation. I'm like, yeah. And she's like, yeah, they put a whole bunch of into their hands. Yeah. And then like they clean in the locker. Yeah, maybe they're going out and drinking this right down because sanitizer, the alcohol-based sanitizer, that is 62% ethyl alcohol. You cannot get a cheaper drink. 62% alpha alcohol. All right. Well, we see this crazy stuff. So the powdered now, the inhaling the heated vapors, the eyeballing. It's like, what? Remember, like, who would put a bottle of vodka up to their eye and tilt it back? Well, if you were 15 at a party and your friends were like, do it, Aaron! And you're like, here's this risk. It's what? Exciting and emotionally rewarding. And your friends want you to do it. And the emergency room will just remind you not to do it again after they get done treating your eye. So look, last but not least, 1 year of binge drinking, Duke University finds out that in young brains, 23 and under, alcohol excites those brains. That's why I'm on spring break. I'm talking to a kid I played hoop with who's staggering down the beach. I'm like, Brian, how many beers did you have tonight, buddy? He's like, 18! And I'm like, well, clinically, you should be dead. He's like, yeah! You know? So it turns out that each dose of alcohol reinvigorates this young brain. So Duke says, yeah, until 48 hours later, when calcium runs out of its channels, gets into cells and starts killing them. 10% loss in the prefrontal cortex, the smart part. Look at the left-hand side, check it all the way up to the top. Starts out down at the bottom, ends up at the top there. So Duke says, here's the part that makes you smart. You know, another part called the hippocampus that does memory, motivation, and social behaviors. That's going to end up with 10% damage. So Duke wanted to see, you know, like social behaviors, like how you study, you know, what's appropriate social interactions. Duke wanted to study these guys for like probably 4 years. They end up with the cohort starting over every couple of years. How come? Lose 10% of 2 important parts in the brain every year that you've been drinking. So you're 20% down in 2 parts. You know, why doesn't Duke have that same cohort to study? What happens with 45% of them? Flunked out, dropped out, and transferred to a less rigorous academic environment. And let me just say this. Duke does keep some of the other ones and has them come back. The reason they can't keep them all in study is half of them quit, and almost half of the other ones say, you know what? I have to declare my major now. I'm in engineering. I'm in this. What do they change about their behavior once they declare their major? They stop binge drinking. So Duke finds out, and I'm going to tell you this part quickly. I know I'm running over a little bit because I see some of your concerned expressions as you reflect on your 40 years of undergraduate behavior. And you're wondering, am I 40% down in 2 important places in my brain? And the answer is, what Duke finds so remarkable is you get them to quit binge drinking, in fact, quit drinking, you know, between 6 months and a year later, you gain not all of it, but a huge amount of that effect, because even at 19 and 20 years old, our brain is still remarkably neuroplastic. So anytime you can get people to stop is a good time. All right, 7 times more likely to have multiple sex partners, 6 times more likely to cut class. Well, you can read this, it's all in there. But I want you to see the bottom one, more likely to be self-injurious. So cutters, you know, sort of defiantly reckless behavior, cutting, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, and completed suicides. Listen, 87% of the college students say they felt overwhelmed. You know, 33% say they consider themselves seriously depressed. Suicide is the #2 cause of death on the college campus. You know, and a ton of it is related to alcohol. 13 teens die every day, 600,000 high school and college students injured, 70,000 alcohol-involved sexual assaults, dropouts, flunkouts, unwanted pregnancies, and addiction potential. All of that. You know, so if there are drugs on the street, nobody knows what the contaminants, the potency, or the toxins in the actual drug is. You know, there's unpredictable responses, no human trials for a bunch of them we talked about today, no information regarding long-term health consequences. So these are some of the current trends, and they're the majority of what's going on mostly right now. But I'm going to stick around after we're done. I know some of you have places you have to get to, but if someone wants to come up and ask other questions, I'll be happy to answer that. And where will they be able to find this, Michelle, this PowerPoint? Okay, so people sign up, and yeah. So we're gonna make this available, this particular PowerPoint. And once you find these items, you can go find more information about every single one of them, because these are troubling trends that many researchers are taking a closer look at. So thank you all for coming in. Thank you guys.